This is a typical position where black has an isolated pawn. You can see that white has the powerful d4 outpost for his knight or other pieces, and that the d5 pawn is a long-term weakness for black to deal with. Usually, when you have this type of isolated central pawn, when there are lots of pieces on the board, your best bet is to play very actively. Now let's return to that familiar pawn structure. We saw that black had double pawns and isolated pawns. There's one more weakness: pawn islands. A pawn island is a pawn or a group of pawns that has one or more files separating it from any other friendly pawns. In this position, we see that white has 2 pawn islands, and black has 4 pawn islands. This is a big difference, and it means that white's pawns will be more coordinated and have less holes in their structure as the game progresses. A trick that you can use when evaluating pawn structures, especially in or near the endgame, is to ask yourself how many pawn islands each player has. In general, the more pawn islands, the more weaknesses. Another key indicator of whether or not a pawn structure has the potential to be well coordinated is to check out whether they can create a pawn chain. Here we see the f2, e3, d4 pawns forming a chain, but there are much more powerful examples. Take a look at this. Who do you think is better here, white or black? That's right. Here the material is even, but white has a huge advantage because of his pawn structure. First of all, he has 1 pawn island to 4. Black has doubled isolated h-pawns, which are useless and very vulnerable to attack. But perhaps the most impressive element of the position is white's huge pawn chain, stretching from g2 all the way to c6. A critical thing to realize in this type of situation is that white has only one potential weakness, the g2 pawn. Black has to try to attack the base of the pawn chain, but in this position g2 is comfortably defended by the white king. In contrast, black has weaknesses all over the board. And there's another key factor. White has a protected passed pawn. A passed pawn is one that has no enemy pawns blocking its path to promotion. Passed pawns are very important. And my first teacher used to always tell me, passed pawns must be pushed. The further up the board a passer gets, the closer to promotion, and thus the more valuable it becomes. Often in endgames, and you can see this in my endgame course later on in the academy, the position hinges on whose pawns have more potential to be promoted. In this case, both white and black have passed pawns. The main difference is that white's passed pawn is further advanced and protected, while black's passed pawn still sits on its original square and is vulnerable to attack. Passed pawns are good, and protected passed pawns are even better. Here's another factor that should help you evaluate passed pawns in endgames. Whose is further away from the action? Take a look at this position. Here, both sides have passed pawns, but who do you think is winning, white or black? Good job. It turns out that despite the material equality, white is completely winning because he has the outside passed pawn. If black plays king d5, white plays a4. Black has no choice but to stop the promotion. King c4. The king has to leave the king side. And now white can play actively with his king. King e4. Next he can play king takes e5, followed by king f6 to g7. Takes on h7, takes on g6, and then he'll make a queen with the h-pawn, or g-pawn. White can gobble up all black's kingside pawns while the black king is preoccupied on the other side of the board. Returning to the last position. It's true, you could argue that black has the outside passed pawn, but in this case it doesn't really matter because the rook is such a powerful long-distance operator, and other factors are in this case more important. For example, the powerful pawn chain, black's many weaknesses, black's doubled pawns. White has a great game here. In chess, we're often weighing the values of different types of principles in order to properly evaluate a position. You'll get better at this as you gain experience and get used to working with the fundamentals. In time, all the principles I'm teaching you in this course will become part of your chess intuition. You'll think with them without even knowing it. For now, let's look at some of the impact of pawn structure on strategy.